So Henry was your grandfather.
That's right. Whenever I speak of Henry, that means Henry Mack, my grandfather. His father was Jesse. Andrew was 18 years older than Henry. And then there was a girl in there. I have statistics on that. I have their birth dates. Peter, who was younger than Andrew, became a Lutheran minister. Now, I have never been able to discover why or how he became a Lutheran minister. He served, I have those dates down, but he died in 1879. He died at a relatively young age, and he had a large family, one son of which, John Homer Mack, was not exactly raised by my grandfather because he was quite grown up, but he was the guardian for John Homer. But Noah Mack, who was the son of Andrew Mack, also was a preacher.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes.
What kind was he?
A Mennonite preacher, and he was a missionary into the Welsh mountains of Pennsylvania for several years. And later, I think Noah became the Bishop of New Holland, which is out in Lancaster County.
Was that Mennonite?
Oh, Mennonite. Oh, yes. And Noah used to visit Henry. See, he and Henry were, I guess, pretty much of an age, even though Noah was Andrew's, because his father was 18 years older than Henry. Noah and Henry were more of the same age, though they were two different generations.
So you knew Noah?
I didn't know Noah. I saw Noah. Because
were these people forbidding to look at or not?
Oh, no.
They're humble people?
Uncle Andrew, as my mother always referred to him, and his wife, whose name was Elizabeth. There are Elizabeths in the family all over. Their family was pretty much grown up by the time Henry's first wife died, Henry's wife Elizabeth. And Henry had a breakdown, and so the two older children, Annie and Willie, went to live with Uncle Andrew and Aunt Betsy until their father remarried. The baby went to his mother's sister until, see, by the time his father remarried, he was almost 3. And no, I guess he was 2.
How long did they live with Uncle Andrew?
From almost that entire 3 years. Mm-hmm. And so my mother always, Anna, or Annie, I will refer to my mother, she always felt a great deal of affection for that uncle and aunt, because you see, she was at a very early age and yet old enough to feel the loss of her mother very deeply. And so she used to talk about her Uncle Andrew, who would come in from the fields at dinner time. That was what we call lunch. And they always took a little time afterwards to, I guess, digest the food and not be out in the fields in the hottest time of the day. But he always sat at his desk and read his Bible and prepared his sermons during that time of the day. And she remembered that because, of course, by the time her father remarried, she was almost 8. And she remembered a great deal about things like that, the life on the farm.
Well, he was a practicing farmer then, as well as a preacher.
Yes, the Mennonites did not pay their clergy. They chose their clergy by lot. the lots were straws in a Bible, and the eligible men, I don't know what eligibility was required, not education, pulled the straws, and I don't know whether it was the long straw or the short straw that determined the minister, but that's how they became ministers. And what the procedure was for a bishop, I do not know. But of course, I don't think Andrew was a bishop in that time. He was a bishop for many years. I would have to coordinate it with that biography that you sent me written by Noah, which I had not seen. Where did that come from?
It was in my dad's papers.
Oh, it was. I had not seen that one.
Well, when Annie lived with her Uncle Andrew, all the language was in German, correct?
But
Pennsylvania German.
Pennsylvania Dutch. We call it Pennsylvania Dutch. Annie's mother, Lizzie Bechtel, Mack, spoke English. So that at home, Annie's first language was English. And of course, Henry spoke both languages fluently. That story of Andrew, that biography of Andrew, explains pretty much what his attitude was. He felt that it made people, that education put them above their brothers, and yet he sent his sons to an English school because he knew that inevitably English was necessary. In other words, he was a little divided on that issue. But Henry, being the youngest, undoubtedly knew English quite well, and so Henry and Lizzie spoke English in their family for those 5 years that they were married. And Annie's first language was English. So Henry was born on a farm to poor parents. Henry was the youngest child, the youngest surviving child. There was a sister who died at an early age, but Henry was the youngest surviving child. So by that time his parents were old and so forth. So Henry apparently farmed until he was 21. Then he was free to go. You see, at 21, a child was free to go. There was no more responsibility to the parents. Until 21, they were really responsible to their parents and to working on the farm. So Henry apparently saved or acquired enough money so that at 21 he did things like he went to business school in, I think, Allentown. I'm not sure of the place, it's in the book. But he meticulously recorded every penny he spent, which gives a very good picture of what he was doing, you see. And he, for instance, everybody had visiting cards in those days. He printed visiting cards and sold them. He did all sorts. Everybody was an entrepreneur. Then later in life, he became the one to whom people had confidence that he would be a guardian over their children. He handled estates, and this is in the book. He also became, I think, treasurer of the creamery. Now, the creamery was the cooperative. This was before that term was known. The creamery was the cooperative where the farmers disposed of their milk jointly, which meant that it was more profitable and more economically feasible. They had no automobiles to take everything by horse and carriage and wagon, and you have no idea how much time that used up, so that a central creamery was apparently one of the answers. And these books really supply a picture of what life must have been like at that time. And I always wanted to do something on Henry using a little bit of imagination, but when he bought a valentine for Lizzie, that was his wife-to-be, my mother's mother, who died in childbirth after the first child. And so all these things are recorded as expenditures, you see, which gives one the opportunity of filling in the feelings and the emotions that went with the expenditures.
What was Lizzie's whole name?
Bechtel. She was
Elizabeth?
Elizabeth. I would have to look at my records to give the middle name, which of course was her unmarried name. The middle names were always the parents.
How old was she when she died?
33.
Oh, she was pretty well along then. Her first child at 33?
Her third child.
Third child.
See, Annie was the first child, Willie was the second child, and Jessie was the third child. And Jessie was 15 days old when his mother died of typhoid fever. So that was in 1884, in the spring of 84. In the spring of 87, Henry married Sarah Ann, and she was the mother of Harvey and Philip.
What happened to Willie and Jessie?
Well, Jessie died of typhoid fever when he was 26, and newly married with 4 months pregnant wife, who gave birth to Jessie Mack Loudis, a girl, in 1911. And she remarried Keller Shank and had 2 other children. Harvey, the non-resistor, got to France. Philip spent his World War I days in Camp Meade, and he was just about to be shipped. He became a second lieutenant. He was in, I guess they called it officers training, and he became a second lieutenant, and he was just about to be shipped to France when the armistice came, much to his chagrin. Harvey, on the other hand, stayed and did reconstruction work with the Quakers, and he was there, I'm not quite sure for how long, but during most of 1919, I think. And he got to see France, and there's even a postcard there from Berlin. So
what years are we talking?
We're talking 1918, 1919.
When did Harvey first go over?
I'm not sure. 1918. The armistice was not declared until November 11th in 1918. He was there in the early part of 1918 because some of those postcards are dated January 1918. So he was there before. I have the inventory of the Valley Cemetery done in 1931 or 2, in which Henry, that is my grandfather, your great-grandfather, Henry Mack, was on the committee. And so that I know where the graves are, and I know who is buried there. But
what about Willie?
Willie was the father of Helen, who was 5 days older than J. Howard, Helen Mack. Henry Mack was born 13 months later. He is no longer living. He died in Alabama a year or 2 ago.
They kept repeating the names, Henry, Jessie.
That's right. Gladys Mack Deerdorf died of cancer in about, I'm a little vague on her death date. So she is not surviving. Helen is still surviving. She lives in Florida, and I talk to her on the telephone a couple times a year. And of course, Harvey and his first wife, Eva Hartzell, had one child, Robert.
Bob.
Philip and Catherine had Alice and Helen Geiges. While she was speaking Dutch for those years, I don't remember her saying that she went to school but she must have gone to school. And I think by that time, the schools were required to teach English.
Well, I have her grammar book.
Yeah.
From 18.
That was a little older.
Yeah, it
I
must
think
have
she's
been
a little
older than 8 years old.
Yeah. So Annie wanted to put all that stuff aside. She didn't want to be plain. She liked pretty clothes. She wanted education more than anything else. And because she had to stop her education at 6th grade, she made up her mind she was not going to marry a farmer. She was going to marry somebody with more education than she had, and her children were going to be educated.
Well, she succeeded.
Yes, she did.
That's when you say that, put all that stuff behind her, we refer to the traditional Mennonite behavior?
We refer to the language. We refer to the dress. At that time, unfortunately, the old Mennonite church was free of persecution. They could do what they pleased. They became more interested in the details than they were in the basis for their faith, or many of them did. And for instance, one thing, I don't know whether I have it in that writing that I've done, but Annie made herself a dress. This was while she was still at home under the age of 21 with her stepmother. She made this dress, and it has some trimming on it. I think it may be, I may have a picture of her with that dress on. And when her stepmother saw it, she said, "That dress is too fancy." So Annie appealed to her father. Her father said, now he's in the quandary. He has a wife who is the stepmother to his daughter, whom I think he loved and admired more than he ever gave evidence of, at least to her, to his daughter.
To Annie.
To Anna.
Anna.
Annie then. She was still Annie then.
I mean, he wasn't expressive?
Well, he wanted to keep things on an even keel. So he said, well, you can't wear it to meeting, but you can wear the dress on other occasions. That was the way things were. Her stepmother, Annie's stepmother, was a good woman. She knew a great many things about housekeeping, running a farm, because she was 35 when she was married, and she had been running her father's household, and she was
35 for the first time?
Anschaffige Frau. Schaffica is a word that we can't translate exactly in English, but schaffe means to work. In other words, she was a
working woman.
A workable woman. That is, she knew all about that type of thing. But she hadn't much sympathy for a stepdaughter who liked to read and who also, somewhere or other, also liked pretty clothes. How she did this, I don't know. But she knew what she wanted. And of course, at that time, the Mennonites in Bali did not have to wear bonnets. They were not wearing the head covering was not required. In 1914, when Annie and Howard R. were living in Philadelphia, but still went to Bali for communion once a year, the bishop, Andrew, wrote to his niece, Annie, I wish I had that letter, I don't, saying that if she came up to communion, she would have to wear a head covering and a bonnet. So that was the point at which Annie decided that the new Mennonites were more receptive to her feelings. And of course there was a church in Philadelphia, and Howard R. would have been perfectly happy to stay with the old Mennonites, but of course he was not required to wear a collarless coat and no necktie. He is pictured in all of his youthful pictures with a collar and a necktie and a regular coat and a derby hat. So he too enjoyed being, I wouldn't even say fashionable, but he enjoyed not being set apart by his clothing. Anna was the only daughter. That's why she had to stop school at 6th grade, because here was her stepmother. She was the oldest. She was a girl. And when she was 9, her brother Harvey was born. 2 years later, Philip was born. Her stepmother was not in good health. I think she had the rheumatiz at a very early age. The rheumatiz. Rheumatism is what we now call arthritis.
Oh.
They called it the rheumatiz. And I think that she had that at a very early age. And so that's why Annie was stuck with the farm task. And when she decided she was not ever going to marry a farmer.
But when did she leave the home?
When she was 21. But she came back because after a year or so in Philadelphia, she came home because I think she felt the responsibility of her father and her brothers, because her stepmother was not well. I don't know why they moved to Philadelphia earlier in the year in which Annie and Howard R. were married.
What year is that?
1906.
Okay.
And they moved to Philadelphia.
The Mack
in the
family.
early part. The Macks moved to Philadelphia. I don't know whether Will and Jessie had come to Philadelphia earlier. Harvey and Philip, of course, were young. Harvey, being born in 1891, would only have been 15, and so they were teenagers.
What did they do with the farm? Sold it.
Sold it if it was theirs. It may have been rented. Some of those details I really don't know, and never thought about it until it was too late to ask anybody.
Well, by the time they moved, then Henry was more established in his trust capacity.
Well, Henry and Will went into business, a butter and egg business, and I think the first wagon said H.S. Mack and Son. Will, for a short time, had a business of his own. I had a picture of that which I sent to William B. Mack, who was the son of Will's son Henry, and who lives in Alabama, and he has that picture. But it did say William B. Mack, and it showed on this wagon. But when, in my recollection, in the years of my recollection, it was still H.S. Mack and Son, and then it became later when Henry retired, it became W.B. Mack, and they had a butter and egg business, which they distributed from the wagon.
Were they still doing that in the 40s?
Not in the 40s, no.
There was somebody who had in the family when we were living on Sedgwick Street who came over and they had a truck. Who might that have been? I think it was a relative.
Maybe. Now wait a minute. In the 40s, yes, that was still Will.
That was Will.
That was Will.
The guy on the back of the truck when he was moving.
Because he had his business. He lived at Butler Street, Old York Road and Butler Street. Old York Road meanders somewhere to the east as Germantown Avenue goes diagonally to the west and north. Old York Road goes to the east and north. And they lived at Old York Road and Butler Street, which was a corner property. And in his basement, he candled his eggs.
Candled?
C-A-N-D-L-E-D.
What does that mean?
They held the eggs up to the light, which determined whether the embryo was developing, in which case the egg went out.
Oh, they didn't sell fertilized eggs?
No, they just sold eggs.
Mm-hmm. Well, they wouldn't sell them?
I don't think so. I'm not any authority on the butter and egg business, but I know that Howard used to go up there, that is J. Howard, your father, used to go up to Uncle Will's and help him candle eggs. They also had, Will and his father Henry, had a stall in the Oxford Market. Now this was a market smaller than the Reading Terminal Market, but a farmer's market, which would be open like, I guess, Fridays and Saturdays. I think it was just the 2 days. Then the Macks would have a stall there, and beside butter and eggs they sold sausage and scrapple in season, that kind of perishable.
Did they make
goods.
it themselves?
No, they did not make it themselves. They bought it. But the other farmers, it was a typical farmer's market. I was never there. Howard, J. Howard, used to enjoy, well, he worked there, quote unquote, so that he was probably only 12 years old, but he worked there for his uncle and his grandfather. I don't remember just when Henry retired from the business. I'm going to be 84 in a couple of weeks. Well, I may not look it. My eyesight is becoming very poor, and that naturally has a lot to do with writing and so on. Also, it's becoming more and more of an effort just to do the daily things. I think I wrote to you in a letter. And time isn't the same as when you're young. In other words, you can't, or at least I can't, keep on and finish a project. I just get so utterly tired I have to stop. And so I'm going to turn over, I'm going to give you everything I have written. Whether you can make sense of it or not is the problem. And that typed bit that I did in 1982 was really the most ambitious, because I think there are 13 pages of single-spaced typing. But it was a first draft, and it has asterisks and then little pieces of paper cut out with that asterisk, so it'll be a little difficult to make any sense of. So what you want to start on, I don't know. Well, I know Karen is quite interested, and I had promised to send Karen things, but I can't do it anymore. It's all going to be, I had an outline of what I had expected to do. I'm going to hold on to that stuff, those notes, because they don't mean anything to anybody but me, probably. But the one thing that I had hoped to accomplish that I didn't even get started on was Henry, that is Henry Mack, because I have his account books, which he kept meticulously from age 21. You don't understand what life was like